Biden should frankly shut this all down. He won't. Garland should shut this all down. He won't, because they went out on a political limb, and it's like one of those cartoons. They've sawed themselves, right? You know, and now the limb's falling, and the cliff is on the other side. And there's nothing they can do, and they're falling into the political abyss. So there was another shady search of one of Joe Biden's residences that came up with more classified documents, or documents marked as classified. And of course, this search was conducted in a way that protected Joe Biden and allowed him certain benefits that were not afforded President Trump, further highlighting the disparate treatment between Biden and Trump in the way these so-called document searches have been conducted. There was no raid. I'm aware of no grand jury. They let Biden's lawyers watch them do the search. It's not even clear if the new special counsel was involved in this search. Did they bypass him to do it? It's unclear. And what's interesting is not only did they find additional classified information or documents marked classified from his time as vice president, but they found information that was classified from his time as senator, which legally is a wowzer of a development. Because whatever argument he has, and I think there are substantial arguments that I'll go over with you again, that records he had as vice president that were classified, he had a right to keep and use as his own after he left office. But that's not the case. There's no constitutional or procedural or legal basis for him to keep records that were classified from his days of the Senate. And that, to me, raises issues of significant criminal liability for him that are unlikely to be pursued, obviously, by this Justice Department. But that's the big news out of this, in addition to the fact that, you know, after 2 months of searching and telling us they had everything, they found more. And it's not clear whether they've done, quote, a sufficient search, unquote, of his beach residence in Rehoboth, Delaware, or frankly anywhere else he may have been hanging out in, including his offices at this Penn Center here in Washington, D.C., which is, as I say, just down the street from us. And now on top of that, the records from his Senate days, as I've been discussing with you over the last, frankly, almost 2 years, because we've been in court with the Daily Caller News Foundation trying to get these records, his Senate records are up, stashed away in the University of Delaware as the result of a secret deal with the university to keep them away from the American people. I think the public disclosure of that part of the deal is at least 2 years, until at least 2 years after he leaves office, or political office. So that means every record from his days in the Senate are being kept from the American people. Every record. And now we have reason to believe, as I previously discussed with you here, that the records there include classified information. I mean, if he has classified information in his home from his days in the Senate, it's fair to assume, certainly if you're a law enforcement official who wants to make sure all of that classified information is where it's supposed to be, it's up in Delaware. And I would predict that there is going to be a search. It's probably going to be as shady as the prior searches of the University of Delaware records, the Senate records there, 1,800 boxes worth. And I was on radio with my friend Vince Colonese on WMAL here, and I made that prediction. He says, actually, I have another prediction for you. The search is already taking place, or is taking place as we speak, meaning this is the way the Biden operation goes. They pretend they're being forthcoming, they pretend they're being forthright, when in fact they're operating as if they have something to hide. And it was interesting that CNN had a story that the Justice Department had to threaten a subpoena, and that they were unhappy with the way the Biden administration had talked about these searches. For instance, they said in disclosing finally, or in discussing the uncovering of classified information allegedly in the Penn office, they didn't disclose a material fact that they found classified information in his home. And they knew about it when they were saying, oh, look, we found him in the office. And you leave out the fact you didn't find him in the home? I tell you, if Trump pulled that, there'd be raids all over America. Every one of his properties probably would have been raided but Biden gets a pass. And again, I want to highlight something because some of you may not want to hear this, but in my view, the legal reality is that based on prior Justice Department positions, prior National Archives positions, and a key court decision in a case that Judicial Watch brought to get records, or to get the National Archives to get records that Bill Clinton kept after he left office. And we were told to go jump in a lake. No one can second guess a president. His description or his designation of presidential versus personal records, there's really no enforcement mechanism. Certainly the archives is in no position to judge or to go after a president's records after he leaves office. In fact, the Justice Department told the court, you can look in the transcript, we presume if a president has records after he leaves office, they're personal. And under the Presidential Records Act, the president has these powers that are awesome in scope and power, right? And that's all kind of based on his position as commander-in-chief and such, and chief executive. And the Presidential Records Act says for the purpose of presidential records and the designations and preservation and judgment calls, the vice president has the same powers. So every former president and vice president shouldn't have to worry about this. And this is the, I say, in many ways it's an outrage, and I'll tell you why, but it's also an absurdity. You had these corrupt incompetents at the Justice Department who were anti-Trump fanatics, in my view, thinking we've got Trump on these records issues and we're just going to change the rules, reinterpret the law, do a 180 to justify harassing him and raiding his home. Now, they're evidently, at least publicly, there was no one sensibly saying, well, what about other former presidents? What about other former vice presidents? And I say evidently because maybe someone did quietly say to Vice President Biden, hey, you guys may want to check to make sure that you're not in the same boat as Trump is. So as a result now, because of this anti-Trump fanaticism and this abuse, every former president and every former vice president faces criminal liability over their records handling based on the Justice Department changing the rules to target and harass Trump. And so the archives gets him, and I've highlighted this for you repeatedly over the last year or so, that this scandal's been taking place. And sure enough, the goofballs at the National Archives, they send a letter to all the former presidents and vice presidents who are alive saying, by the way, can you please search for your personal records and make sure there's no classified records? Well, it's crazy town. It's absolute crazy town. Now, if Joe Biden was listening to my advice, he'd say this is crazy. It's obviously interfering with the office of the presidency and my former presidential, the members of my club, the ex-president's club or the president's club, and the vice president's club. We can't operate. A current president and vice president can't operate. And obviously, if they're worried that after they leave office, some bureaucrat at National Archives is going to launch a criminal inquiry into how they handle documents. Documents that, frankly, the classification of which all flows from the powers of the president as commander-in-chief. I mean, just think of the absurdity right now, frankly, of the Justice Department that is run by President Biden. They say that it's independent. It's not independent constitutionally, nor should it be. Making an issue that the President of the United States has classified records he shouldn't have. How does that work? That's the absurdity of this. So when we practice to deceive, I don't know what the rest of that phrase is, or when you engage in this misconduct, they reap the whirlwind. Whatever the metaphor is, however I want to mix it, it fits here. So they threw out the rule book to target Trump, and now that rule book is nowhere to be found to protect other presidents and vice presidents from this abuse. And that all being said, all of those protections I think the presidents and vice presidents have under the law, because remember, Judicial Watch was on the other side of this issue, and we lost. That's why we're sensitive about it. And now they're taking Judicial Watch's position after they took the opposite position to deny us access to Clinton records? No, 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 no. We're not going to get away with it as far as we're concerned. We're going to speak out about it. But as I said earlier, the vice president or president, doesn't matter what their title is, they don't get to keep records because they were senators. So any classified records that he kept as a senator is something that is on its face in violation of law. Now, whether he can be prosecuted for that as a president, it's not clear. It's unlikely, because the Justice Department has a policy that makes sense constitutionally, in my view, that they can't really prosecute a sitting president. It's like the president prosecuting himself. It doesn't make constitutional sense. But that criminal liability isn't going to disappear in 2 to 6 years whenever President Biden is no longer president. So that's the big news, right? And of course now Vice President Pence did another looking at his records, and he found classified records among some of the boxes he had taken. Now, is he facing criminal liability? Should he? Of course not. Should Biden, because he's got records that were being used? I don't think so, at least not those records he had from his vice presidency. And nor should Trump, which is, of course, the big issue. And Biden should frankly shut this all down. He won't. Garland should shut this all down. He won't, because they went out on a political limb, and it's like one of those cartoons. They've sawed themselves, right? You know, and now the limb's falling, and the cliff is on the other side. There's nothing they can do, and they're falling into the political abyss. And I used to think that because the conspiracy theory was, or the analysis was, and I don't want to call it a conspiracy theory because the left uses that to diminish the analysis. But the analysis was that this whole Biden records thing is the Democratic Party kind of coming up with ways to get Biden out of office. And I thought, well, that's probably not the case. It was just corrupt incompetence by the Biden gang. But as time goes on and just gets worse and worse, and you see the complaints of Democratic senators about the way this has been handled, and other Democrats, you might wonder or begin to wonder if that some Democrats are seeing this as a crisis that they won't want to let go to waste in terms of changing out Biden or inviting primary challenges to him and making them more inviting. So that's a political analysis. I don't know which way is which, but I kind of revert back to the simplest analysis, is that the corrupt, incompetent Justice Department and National Archives exceeded their authority and abused power and abused the rule of law to target Trump. And now the same situation, it's apples to apples to apples, is implicating Joe Biden, implicating Mike Pence, who knows, Al Gore, Dan Quayle, George W. Bush. What about the estates of dead presidents? Presidents Reagan and Presidents Bush. The Presidential Records Act began, I think, in 1980, but the classification system, I think, began, was it during the Eisenhower administration? Doesn't matter. But the point is, you can go back decades and start snooping around for classified information. And I love the Senate angle, right? And I have a feeling that one of the reasons the senators are mad at Biden, because now someone's going to look at the Senate and say, well, what do you have? If Biden did this, did anyone else in the Senate do this? How do you all handle classified records there? Are there other senators with similar liabilities? It's a fair question. Same goes for the House. I mean, if he's taking records home, and I can just imagine, because I was talking to someone, I was doing an interview on Twitter the other day, and they said, well, aren't there specific regulations and processes for tracking these documents? In my understanding, my answer was yes. But when when someone is coming in for a briefing or sharing a record, and some politician full of himself says, well, the rules don't apply to me, what is that person supposed to do? The rules get bent or ignored. And that's, I think, typically what happened, certainly if indeed these are classified records from the Senate that were improperly taken by Biden, that's probably what happened. These senators they all think they're all little mini presidents over there, right? They're all presidents in waiting. They see themselves as the equivalent of the president. You talk to some of these senators, not all of them, but a lot of them are. They walk around like they're Louis XIV sometimes. So I suspect this Biden problem with classified records is, especially for senators who've been there forever and a day, which many of them have been, is going to be a significant issue. So this is the whirlwind that everyone is reaping because of the anti-Trump animus. By the way, that was basically egged on a little bit by many Republicans who don't like Trump in this town. So it's really kind of a absurd crisis in that sense, but because it's putting the presidency at risk in terms of criminalizing the everyday operations of the presidency because of this senseless targeting of Trump. It harms our Constitution. It harms our constitutional organization, our constitutional structure of government, because the president has this to worry about. And maybe, maybe the law should protect classified records more directly, but the president's the president. They're only classified because of his authority, typically, or by statute. So there's no way of getting around the president's authority related to classified records. And when you have that unlimited authority, essentially under the Constitution, who is the archives to second guess it, or some hack politicized prosecutor at the Justice Department who supposedly is working for the government, and he's not more important than the president, or even frankly former presidents in the exercise of their duties. So if you're confused, you should be. You know why? Because this is just Keystone Cops with an element of corruption. God help the country, because this is what our Justice Department and our justice system has come down to. But to kind of sum it up, to be clear, under the way the law is supposed to be interpreted by, and has been interpreted by the Justice Department, validated by a court, that a president and vice president, if they have a classified record after they leave office, they don't, quote, have to designate it or whatever. If they have it, it's presumed to be declassified, meaning personal. So, as I said with Trump, it was much ado about nothing, but it's the Justice Department that said it's a lot of something. And as a result, Biden is in the same water as Trump. And frankly, maybe Pence is as well. And who knows what Obama has. I guarantee Obama plays these games as well. He's still in D.C., right? His home up the street. It's about a 15-minute drive from here. If the FBI doesn't know where it is, we can direct them to the house. This city is so corrupt, I can't tell you. But thank God for Judicial Watch, because I don't know what we'd do if we weren't here. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.